another video. So today I'm going to be discussing, I've been asked to talk about more the basics of nutrition, so I'm going to do exactly that. This will probably be a 3 or 4 part series discussing carbs, fats, proteins and micronutrients and anything else I remember, because obviously this is obviously like the fundamentals to your nutrition, but I think because it is the building blocks of it, it could be quite easily left out. So yes. So I guess to start off with, why do we need foods? That is obviously probably a really stupid question and or a really simple question, but it's important to address. So obviously, food is our fuel source. We eat food, we digest it, and we absorb the nutrients from it. The nutrients that we absorb from the food is then used for metabolic processes. Now, don't let that scare you. Just bear with me. The nutrients that are absorbed from the food are then used to provide energy for respiration, which produces ATP. And ATP is simply just a molecule which provides energy to our cells. So food creates ATP. So food gives energy to make ATP. ATP gives energy to the cells to do what they need to do. And then, this ATP is then used to provide energy for our cells for things such as digestion, muscular contraction, just any cellular process that our bodies go through is what ATP is needed. And obviously, in order to make ATP, you need food, and therefore you need food for fuel. So then calories. So calories is simply the measurement of energy that food contains. For example, if you were to burn the food in a calorimeter, it's the amount of energy that would be released in order to heat up water. So that, again, that sounds complex, but literally, if you were to put food in this fancy machine, burn it, it would obviously release heat energy, and then this heat energy would heat up 0-degree water, and then the way they calculate it is how much energy the water has taken up and therefore heated up by, to calculate the calorie content. But again, don't worry about that, but just think about it as, fuel goes into a car to give it energy to move, and that's the same as calories into humans. So calories are made up of 3 macronutrients: carbs, protein and fats. Alcohol is also a macronutrient, but I won't discuss that right now. Just think of the 3. And there are also micronutrients, obviously, which are vitamins and minerals, such as vitamin B12, vitamin D, and all that stuff. So then, carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are the body's main source of fuel. So the body uses glucose to provide energy for respiration, which makes the ATP, like I just discussed. Remembering that ATP is the energy our cells use. And glucose is simply the final breakdown product of any carbohydrate. So you eat a carbohydrate, whether complex or simple. I'll be going over that in a minute. And then it gets broken down eventually into glucose, and then this glucose makes ATP essentially. For example, you eat pasta, chew it, digest it, and enzymes, which simply just are proteins which break your food down, will break it down into smaller molecules, eventually glucose. So I've made this little diagram, not the one in the middle, I got that off Google, but with the the pictures of the food. And basically the more, so as you can see at the top you've got starch and glycogen. Then as you go down, you let me start again. So basically, you've got the 2 types of carbs that are referred to all the time as simple and complex carbohydrates. So simple carbohydrates are at the bottom here. So look at the glucose fructose, glucose galactose. And then basically the higher up of this you go, the more complex the carbohydrate gets. So to give you a real world example, which will make far more sense probably to you, is if you go on the right, you can see at the bottom right there is sugar. So that is the simplest form of carbohydrate, literally pure glucose. So if you were to just eat sugar, your body wouldn't need to digest it. That sugar would be ready to be absorbed into the blood and for the cells to use. Go up once more. These are disaccharides. So basically they've got 2 molecules. So an example of a disaccharide, so not a completely simple carb, but also not a complex carb, is milk, chocolate, cookies, that kind of thing. And then at the top is the proper complex carbs, things like pasta, potatoes, cruciferous vegetables like green vegetables, broccoli, that kind of thing, and they are the complex carbs. So then onto the buzzword insulin. So you've probably seen this thrown around everywhere. So basically all it is that when blood sugar levels rise, insulin is released by the pancreas. And basically, obviously, when you eat food and you digest it, this then puts the glucose, the sugar, into your blood because you've digested it. That's where it goes, and the pancreas recognizes this and releases insulin. That's all it is. And the insulin then basically moves the glucose from the blood to cells to be used or stored as glycogen. So it's just another hormone that helps regulate blood sugar levels. So Also, glycogen is basically how carbs are stored in the body. So let's say you eat 45 grams of sugar. Don't advise it, but let's say you do, and 30 grams of it are used for cells, for your cells that are active right now that need the fuel to make the ATP, the energy. But 15 grams of that left of that 45 grams isn't needed, so it's stored in your muscles and or in your liver as glycogen. And then basically at a later date, let's say tomorrow when you wake up, obviously you've been fasting because you've been asleep, and in order to carry out in order for your cells to carry out the process they need to carry out, they will then tap into them glycogen stores and use the stored carbohydrate basically. So hopefully this is making sense. So for example, let's say you eat loads of sweets, there's a huge spike in blood sugar levels, and therefore more insulin is released to try and lower the blood sugar levels back to normal, because obviously you don't want your blood sugar levels to be highly sustained. It will lead to hypoglycemia, which is what is the issue of diabetics. And the more simple the carb, the more insulin will need to be released, because the simple carbohydrates digest much faster, and therefore it's just like a big pounding of carbohydrates and sugar into your bloodstream. Whereas if you imagine you're eating a more complex carb, which takes longer to digest, and therefore it's kind of more sustained energy release. So then what is the deal with complex carbs? Now you hear it again all the time. Complex carbs, just eat more complex carbs. Complex carbs don't make you gain fat. I mean, as I hope you know now, carbs don't make you fat, too many calories do. So don't stress about it in that sense. But basically complex carbs, again, they take longer to digest because there's more to break down simply, and therefore don't have such a huge impact on blood sugar levels as simple carbs do, because again, they take longer to break down, broken down slowly, and therefore released into the blood sugar levels slowly, and therefore the response from insulin to get the sugar out of the blood, again, insulin can be released much slower because there's a kind of more sustained release of sugar into the blood. Which is, again, Weetabix are promoted as a slow-releasing breakfast cereal. I think that's been their slogan for ages. Don't think that's exactly it, but it's something along them lines, because it's basically made of a complex carbohydrate such as wheat and barley and all them other ones. Complex carbohydrates also usually contain fibre, which slows digestion down also, and they also tend to be higher in micronutrients, your vitamins and minerals. So an example of some complex carbs then, so oats, rice, pasta, potatoes, some cereals such as bran flakes, cornflakes, brown wholemeal bread, beans, lentil, couscous. Obviously there's more, it's probably more of an extensive list, but there's an example of ones that you can probably think about right now. And examples of some simple carbs then, so fruit juices, milk, which is, again, I wouldn't say it's quite a simple carb, but it's probably more simple than complex, chocolate, fruit, sweets, all the nice stuff. And an easy way to tell is to look at the sugar content, and the lower the sugar out of the total, so let's say there's 10 grams of sugar, but there's 30 grams of carbs, it's probably more of a complex carb. Well, it is more of a complex carb. So here's an example here. You can see the total carbohydrate, 37 grams, and total sugars is 12 grams. And therefore, if the total sugars was, 30 and above, then you'd say it's more of a simple one. But the sugar content isn't even a third of a third? Yeah, is a third, actually, is literally about a third of the total carbohydrate. So all in all then, does it matter? Obviously, this is all just jargon if you can't apply it. So obviously, unless you have any condition that affects either hormone insulin or glucagon, which I didn't discuss glucagon, but don't worry about it, then obviously you'll need to monitor the sugar content of your diet, because, for example, diabetes is the condition whereby your body doesn't produce enough insulin and or doesn't respond to its own insulin. And therefore, obviously, if a diabetic person was to eat a very high sugar diet, high in simple carbs, which are obviously digested really fast, and there'd be a massive kind of hit of sugar in the blood, and the body can't coordinate that response. It can't get rid of the sugar because it doesn't have appropriate insulin, and therefore will lead to hypoglycemia, which again is very dangerous and not good. But obviously, if you don't have any conditions such as diabetes that affects your insulin or any kind of hormones related to digestion of carbohydrates, then it really does depend. So it's advisable as a general rule to try and eat about 70 to 80% of your diet from complex carbohydrates, aka to try and eat about, from your total calories from carbohydrates, it's probably recommended that about 70 to 80% of them do come from the more complex. Complex carbs also contain more fibre, more micronutrients, and therefore are digested slower, which essentially means it keeps you full for longer and provides you with more sustained energy levels. So if you were to eat 4 biscuits versus eating the same amount of calories from biscuits in a bowl of brown pasta, your energy levels and, the whole kind of carb slump you'd have would be completely different, just simply due to the release of the sugar into the blood. It's be much slower from the pasta versus from the biscuits. It would probably go straight into your blood, and again, your body would have to coordinate that response appropriately. However, this is not to say that simple carbs should be feared. They definitely should be. They have a very good place. For example, they're good pre and post training foods, because post training we have a quite high quantity in our body of the enzyme, which basically upregulates insulin. So basically, in English, what that means is post training we have a better capability to use the glucose from simple sugars. So simple sugars tend to be advised having post training, but again, don't worry about that. And they're also very tasty. And as always, it is everything in moderation. So just eat like an adult and try and get 70% of your diet from complex carbohydrates. Obviously, if one day you have 20% complex carbohydrates, one day you have 100%, it really doesn't matter. But just being sensible and just having awareness is probably quite helpful. And also, if you struggle to eat enough fibre, then increasing your complex carb intake will also definitely help with that. So that is everything. I believe that was a very complex, not complex, but you know what I mean. If that was overwhelming, then maybe watch through it again, or I'm not sure, but I think it's probably helpful to have an understanding of how it all works. And then I guess you can apply it where you need to apply it. So that is everything, and I will see you soon.